The stagecoach driver set her trunk down in the dust, like it had wronged him, and the freight clerk on the boardwalk laughed before Cora Whitmore's second boot had touched the ground. He laughed the way a man laughs when he has been waiting all morning for something to laugh at. He slapped his thigh. He looked sideways at the two men, leaning against the post outside the feed store so they would know to look too. "Lord, have mercy," he said. "Did the team carry you the whole way, ma'am, or did they trade off?" Cora set her carpetbag down beside her trunk. She straightened her shoulders, which were broad, and her back, which was straight, and she did not look at the men by the feed store. And she did not look at the driver, and she did not look down at her own body, which the clerk and the town had already decided was the most interesting thing about her. She looked at the clerk. "My fare," she said, and held out the coins. He kept laughing. He was a young man with a thin neck and a thin mustache and an Adam's apple that worked when he was pleased with himself. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand as though she had told him a joke. "6 bits," he said, "though I figure we ought to charge by the pound." She did not flinch. She did not blush. She did not bend her face into the careful smile women bend their faces into when they have been struck in public and have decided to pretend they have not been struck. She counted 6 bits out of her purse, laid the coins flat in his palm, and closed his fingers over them with her own hand, so he would feel her hand was steady. "Then, by the pound," she said, "you have undercharged me. Keep the change." He stopped laughing. The men by the feed store stopped laughing. A woman across the street, who had been pretending not to watch, turned her head fully and watched. Cora picked up her carpetbag, stepped around her trunk because she would send a boy for it later, and walked into Bitter Creek with her chin level and her breathing even, and her eyes set on the rutted track at the far end of Main Street that the driver had pointed her toward when she had asked, 4 days ago, in another town, the way to the Calder place. The boardwalk planks took her weight without complaining. That was the thing about Cora Whitmore. She had been told her whole life that she would break what she stood on, and she had spent her whole life standing on things anyway, and nothing had broken yet. And something inside her cracked open. Not from the clerk. Not from the laughter. From the sudden, quiet, terrible understanding that she had crossed a whole territory to come to a town that had already met her and already laughed. If this story already has your chest tight, do me a small kindness, hit that subscribe button, and follow Cora's story all the way through to the very end, because what happens next at the Calder Ranch is the reason I am telling it. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far Cora's story travels. It was August of 1883, and the country east of Bitter Creek had not had rain in 5 weeks. The dust on the road out to the Calder Ranch was fine as flour and rose around her boots in small, soft puffs that settled on the hem of her gray traveling dress and would not brush off. The track ran north between 2 split-rail fences that needed mending in 12 places she counted before she stopped counting. On her left, a hayfield had been cut short and was already going brown at the crowns. On her right, a pasture sloped down to a creek she could hear before she could see water moving fast and clean over stones. The sound of a creek that was not the problem. Whatever was wrong on the Calder place, it was not the creek. She walked. She had been walking since the stage stop because there had been no one at the livery willing to drive a woman of her size out 3 miles for less than $1, and she did not have $1 to throw at being driven. She had the fare back if she needed it, and a little besides, sewn flat into the lining of her bag, where no clerk and no driver and no man at a feed store would ever find it. Her father, who had been a wheat farmer and a small herd cattleman and the kindest man she had ever known, had told her once that a woman with money sewn into her hem walked differently than a woman without it, and she had never forgotten the lesson, and she had never untaught herself from the walk. The Calder Ranch announced itself before she saw the house. A gate stood open with a wooden brand burned into the crosspiece. A sea inside a half-moon, weathered gray. Past the gate the track curved up between cottonwoods toward a low, rambling house, with a porch that ran its full front and a barn behind it leaning a little south. There were no men in the yard. There were no dogs. There was a single horse in a corral, and a single milk cow in a near pen, and the cow was bawling the slow, steady bawl of a cow that had not been milked in too many hours. A man stood on the porch. Psa, ba, ba. He stood the way a man stands who has decided that standing is the day's work. He had one hand braced on a crutch fitted under his right arm. His right leg was set forward but not bearing. She could read that in the lift of his hip. And his left leg carried him. He was lean and weathered, and not yet 40, with a dark beard cut close and dark hair gone a little gray at the temples. And his eyes, when she came close enough for him to find them, were the kind of pale blue that looked colder than they were because the face around them had stopped trying. He watched her come up the track, and he did not smile, and he did not call out, and when she was close enough that she did not have to raise her voice, he said, plain and tired, "I made a mistake placing the notice. I don't need anyone. I'm sorry you walked out." Cora stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She set her carpetbag down on the second step. She looked up at him, which was a thing she had to do because the porch lifted him, and she saw him register the looking up and not flinch from it. "Mr. Calder," she said. "Holt," he said before he had decided to say it, and then his mouth tightened because he had not meant to give her his name. That easily. "Calder," she said again, gently, because she had decided to leave him the formality if he needed it. "I am Cora Whitmore," I answered. "The notice you put up at the stage office in Laramie 3 weeks ago. I came 400 miles. Your cow needs milking." "I'd like to start with supper, I told you," he said. "I made a mistake." "You did," she said, "but not the one you think." He looked at her then for longer than he had meant to. He looked at her face, not her body, and that was the first thing. Most men, when they saw her for the first time, looked at her body, and then made themselves look at her face, out of courtesy, and the courtesy was always worse than the looking. Holt Calder looked at her face first, because the porch, and the crutch, and the leg, had taught him what it cost a person to be looked at like a problem, and he was not going to do it to a stranger on his step. She felt the looking, and the freight, and the first. She did not let her face show that she felt it. "I can't pay you," he said. "You posted the wage. I posted it 3 weeks ago. There's no wage now." "Then we'll talk about the wage when there is one," she said. "Tonight there's a cow to milk and a supper to put on the table, and I have walked 3 miles, and I would like to set this bag down inside a door." A muscle worked in his jaw. He shifted his weight on the crutch, and she heard the small wooden creak of it, and she made herself not look at the crutch, and she felt him register that small mercy too. "You don't know what you're walking into," he said. "I know a man's cow is bawling, and his porch needs sweeping, and his eyes have not slept," Cora said. "That's enough to start with." He almost laughed. It was not a laugh. It was the small breath that goes out of a man when a thing surprises him into being more honest than he meant to be. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Miss," she said. "My father is dead, and I never married." "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Yes." "Go on in," he said, after a long moment, in which she watched him decide and undecide and decide again. "Kitchen's to the left, stove's cold, wood's in the box by the door. There's pork in the smokehouse. I don't know what else there is. I haven't looked." "All right," she said, and picked up her bag and went past him up the steps. She did not brush against him. She did not make her body smaller going through the doorway. She passed within a foot of his crutch, and she let him see that she had measured the distance and did not need to apologize for the measuring. Inside, the house smelled of cold ash and old coffee, and the faint sweet rot of an apple that had been forgotten on a windowsill. The front room had a stone fireplace, a worn settee, a chair, a table with a lamp, and a layer of dust on every flat surface that said no woman and no careful man had lived there in a long time. The kitchen, to the left as he had said, was a long, narrow room, with a window that looked out onto the barn and a black iron stove, with its door hanging open, and a tin coffee pot on its top, that had been cold so long the grounds had set into a cake at the bottom. Cora put her bag down on a chair. She unpinned her hat, and laid it on the table. She rolled her sleeves to the elbow, took the apron from the peg by the door. There was a woman's apron on a peg, by the door, washed and folded, and waiting, and she did not let herself think yet about whose apron it had been, and tied it behind her back. She built a fire in the stove. She drew water from the pump at the kitchen sink, which was the first surprise of the day because a kitchen pump in 1883 in this country was not a thing every house had. And she filed the surprise away. With the apron and the bawling cow, and the man on the porch. The cow's name was on a wooden tag tied to the penrail, Bess. Cora spoke to her the way she had been taught to speak to cattle, low and slow and with no question in the voice, and Bess let down her milk in 3 minutes, and Cora carried 2/3 of a bucket back to the kitchen, and skimmed the cream and set the rest in the spring box she had found on her way back from the pen. She found pork in the smokehouse. She found cornmeal in a tin in the pantry, and lard, and salt, and 3 potatoes that had begun to eye but were still sound, and a jar of pickled beans that someone, the same someone of the apron, surely, had put up neatly, with a strip of muslin tied over the lid. June, 1881. Cora ran her thumb over the pencil, and did not let herself think about it, and opened the jar. By the time the sun was setting behind the cottonwoods, she had cornbread baking and pork frying, in its own fat, and potatoes sliced thin and crisping at the edge of the pan, and the pickled beans warming in a small pot at the back of the stove. The kitchen smelled like a kitchen. The man on the porch did not come in. She did not call him. A woman who calls a man to supper twice has already lost the room. She set 2 plates. She set 2 cups. She poured coffee, fresh, from the pot she had scrubbed and rebuilt. He came in when the cornbread came out of the oven. He came in slowly, the crutch knocking soft on the boards, and he stopped in the doorway, and looked at the table, and then at her. And his face did a thing it had not done in a very long time. It softened. Just at the eyes. Just for a breath. "I haven't sat at this table in a year and a half," he said. "Sit at it tonight," Cora said. He sat. She served him. She gave him a piece of cornbread the size of her palm, and 3 slices of pork, and a heap of potatoes, and a spoon of beans, and she gave herself the same, because she had learned long ago that a woman of her size, who served herself smaller in front of a man, was telling him a lie about who she was. He ate. He ate the way a man eats who has been living on coffee and bread and cold meat for longer than he has counted. He did not speak for a long time. When he had cleared half his plate, he set his fork down and looked at the cornbread on the platter as though he had not believed in cornbread in a while. "Where'd you learn to bake?" he said. "My mother." "Then my father, after my mother died." "Your father baked." "My father did whatever needed doing," Cora said. "He said a man who would not learn to feed himself was a man waiting on a woman to die for him." Holt set his fork down again. "That's a hard thing to say to a child." "He didn't say it to me as a child. He said it to me at 16, the week before he taught me to doctor a bull. He said a great many hard things to me, Mr. Calder. He also said I was the best help he'd ever had, and he meant it, and that is the inheritance I came west with." "What else did he teach you?" Holt said, and she heard the question under the question. He was asking what she could do. He was asking what he had walked into when he had let her past him on the porch. Fence, she said. Soil. Water. Herd. Ledger. Wool. A little. Though I never liked sheep. I can ride if the horse is sound, and I can drive a wagon if the team is matched. I can read a brand, and I can read a man trying to sell me a calf that won't winter. I cannot shoot well, and I do not pretend I can. I sew plainly. I do not sing. He looked at her across the table for a long moment, and the look had nothing in it of the clerk, and nothing in it of the men at the feed store, and she breathed past it without showing him she had to. Miss Whitmore, he said. Cora. Cora, he said. I cannot pay you. You said that on the porch. I am saying it at the table. I heard you both times, Cora said. You will pay me when you can. Until then, you will give me a room with a door that closes, and you will not lie to me about the ranch, and we will see what the month brings. He looked down at his plate. He picked his fork back up. He ate the last of the cornbread on it. He did not agree out loud, because he was not a man who agreed out loud to things that mattered, and she did not need him to. She cleared the plates when he had finished, and she washed them in the basin at the sink, and she heard him on the porch behind her, slow on the crutch, going out to look at his stars, the way a man goes out to look at his stars when he is trying to decide whether his life has just changed. She slept that night in a small room off the kitchen that had been the cook's room before there had been no cook, on a corn-shuck mattress that creaked under her and held her. And she did not cry, because there was no one to see her cry. And crying alone in a room, by the end of the first week, she had the kitchen running. She had the kitchen running, and she had Bess giving a full bucket morning and evening, and she had skimmed enough cream to churn butter twice and trade a pound of it to the neighbor woman a mile east for 24 eggs and a sack of dried apples. She had swept the front room and beaten the rug over the porch rail. She had washed the curtains, which were yellow with old smoke, and hung them back, white again. On rods she had rubbed with lard so they would slide. She had found 3 mice in the pantry, and ended their tenure with a trap and a length of string. And she had scrubbed the pantry shelves with lye, and lined them with newspaper. And she had inventoried what was on them, and made a list of what was not. She had also walked the near pasture fence, and found 9 posts rotted at the base and 7 rails down, and she had mended 4 of the posts and 3 of the rails by the 4th day, working in the cool of the morning before the heat set in. One and a pair of her father's old canvas trousers she had carried west in the bottom of her trunk for exactly this kind of work. She did not wear them where the road could see. She wore them on the back side of the barn where only Holt could see, and Holt, who had ridden along the fence line on his good horse on the 3rd morning to see what she was doing back there, had looked at her in canvas trousers driving a new post into the ground with a maul, and had said nothing at all and turned his horse and ridden back to the house and not mentioned the trousers again. On the 5th day, a feed sack came in on the supply wagon from town. The driver dropped it at the edge of the porch because he did not want to carry it up the steps, and Holt could not, and he tipped his hat at Cora, who had come out to sign the slip, and he drove off, looking back. Twice in a way that told her the story of her arrival had reached town and was being passed across counters. The sack was 60 pounds. Holt came out onto the porch and stood looking down at it, and she watched his jaw work and his hand tighten on the crutch, and she understood, the way she sometimes understood things faster than was kind, that he had been planning in his head how to get the sack inside without her seeing him fail at it. "I'll get it," she said. "No, I'll get it," she said again, gentle, the way she had spoken to Bess, with no question in her voice. "You've got the door. Hold it for me." He did not move for a long moment. Then he reached behind himself with his free hand and pushed the door open and held it, and he looked away from her out toward the cottonwoods, while she bent at the knees the way her father had taught her to bend, and got her hands under the sack and lifted it onto her shoulder in one motion, and carried it past him through the door and through the front room and into the pantry and set it down on the floor beside the flour barrel. When she came back out into the front room, he was sitting in the chair by the cold fireplace. His crutch was leaned against the chair. His face was turned away from her, toward the window. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." "I'd have done it once," he said. "I know. I'd have done it without looking." "I know," Cora said again, and went past him into the kitchen, and did not look back at his face, because she had been raised by a man, and she knew when a man needed his face not to be seen. That night she opened the ledger drawer. She had been thinking about the ledger drawer for 3 days. It was in the front room, in a roll-top desk that had not been rolled up in a long time, and she had dusted around it on her first morning, and noticed that the brass key was still in the lock. A man who has not opened a drawer in a long time, and has left the key in it, is a man who has not opened the drawer on purpose. She had let it alone. On the 6th night, with the supper done, and Holt out on the porch, and the lamp on the kitchen table burning low, she went into the front room, with her shawl around her shoulders, and she rolled the top of the desk up slowly, because the wood was warped, and she did not want to wake him with a crack. The ledger was a green cloth-bound book the size of a Bible. The last entry was dated the 11th of February, 1882. The handwriting before that date was careful and slanted, and the same hand all the way back to 1869, which was as far back as this ledger went. The hand was an older man's hand. Holt's father, she thought. The entries were neat, balanced, double-checked, the work of a man who had loved the keeping of accounts the way some men love their horses. On the 11th of February, 1882, the hand had written, 41 Head South Pasture, water full, grass fair. Below that, the page was blank. Below that, the page would stay blank, because the hand that wrote it had stopped writing. She did not turn the page. She closed the ledger. She put it back. She rolled the top of the desk down. But she had seen what she had come to see, which was the South Pasture water full. And she had been on the South Pasture 3 times in the past week, and the water was not full. The creek ran full at the north end of the property. The water in the channel that fed the South Pasture was a thin brown trickle a child could step across. The grass on the South Pasture was not fair. The grass on the South Pasture was going to thistle in patches the size of a wagon. The cattle that grazed it, 23 head she had counted from the rise above, were thin in a way that was not the weather, because the weather had been hot but not dry enough yet to cost a cow what those cows had lost. The ranch was failing in a pattern that did not match the weather. She did not say this to Holt. And she would not say it until she had walked the channel from the South Pasture back up to where it left the creek, and she had not had a day yet to walk it. She put it away in the quiet, careful place, where she put things she meant to come back to, and she went to bed, and she lay in the dark on the corn-shuck mattress, and listened to the house breathe around her, and thought about a man's father's hand laying down a pen on a February afternoon. Denny rode in on the 7th morning. She had not met him yet. She had seen him twice from a distance, a thin, sandy-haired boy of perhaps 19 on a sorrel mare, working at the far end of the property where the herd was kept, and she had understood from Holt's short answers at supper that Denny had been his father's hire, and had stayed on through the leg behind, and Holt did not know whether the boy was loyal, or whether the boy was simply too lazy to leave. Denny rode into the yard at full trot, which was a thing a man did not do on another man's ranch, and he swung off his mare and tied her hard at the rail, and came up onto the porch without taking his hat off. Cora was on the porch with a basin of beans she was stringing, sitting on the bench by the door, and Denny stopped when he saw her and looked at her the way the clerk at the stage had looked at her, and his face did a slow, ugly thing. "Lord," he said. "Lord, Holt got himself a cook." Cora did not look up from the beans. "Holt got himself a heifer," Denny said louder, because he had decided he had not been heard. "That what's hauling the feed sacks now? That what's mending the fence?" The door behind Cora opened. "Denny," Holt said. His voice was not loud. His voice was the voice he had used at supper the first night, even and tired, and Cora felt the shift in the air before she heard the words. She had been around men her whole life, and she knew the sound of a man whose temper had finally found the place it had been looking for. "Boss," Denny said, and his voice had already changed, because boys like Denny knew that sound too. "I was just in my yard," Holt said, "on my porch. Where I can hear you. You called this woman a heifer. Boss, you called this woman who has hauled the feed sack you would not haul, and milked the cow you would not milk, and mended the fence you have ridden past for 2 months, a heifer in my hearing." Denny took his hat off. He should have taken it off when he came up on the porch, and he should have taken it off when Cora had looked up at him and he had not. And he was taking it off now, and the taking off was too late. And he knew it, boss. "Get off my porch," Holt said. "Boss." "I get off my porch, Denny, go down to the barn, sit on the bench by the tack room. Sit there until I come down and tell you whether you still work here." Denny went. He did not look at Cora. He went down off the porch and across the yard and into the barn, and the barn door closed behind him, and the yard was quiet, and a jay called once from the cottonwoods, and nothing else made a sound. Holt did not sit down. He stood at the rail with one hand on it and the crutch under the other arm, and he looked out across the yard at the closed barn door, and he breathed. "Miss Whitmore," he said, after a long time. "Cora! Cora!" He did not turn to look at her. "I have not raised my voice for anyone other than myself in 2 years. I want you to know that." "I heard it," she said. "I want you to know that it was not because you needed it." "I know." "It was because he did." "I know," she said again, and went on stringing beans, because the beans did not know that anything had happened, and supper would still have to be made. He sat down beside her on the bench. He did it slowly. He set the crutch against the rail and lowered himself onto the boards and stretched the bad leg out in front of him, and she did not look at the leg, and she felt him not look at her not looking. The bench took both their weights and did not creak, because she had checked it on the second day and replaced the cross brace. They sat there a long time. The light came down golden through the cottonwoods, and the jay called twice more, and a breeze came up out of the south, dry smelling of dust and far smoke. "2 winters back," Holt said. She did not turn her head. "2 winters back, I was breaking a black colt my father had bought the spring before he died. He was a good colt. He'd have been a good horse. There was ice under the snow in the round pen, and I did not see it, and the colt did not see it, and he went down and I went down under him, and he came up and I did not, Holt. He stood on me for a moment trying to find his feet," Holt said. "He was scared. He didn't mean it. The leg was crushed before he was off me. I lay there in the snow for 2 hours before Denny found me. Denny got me to the house. Denny rode for the doctor. Denny stayed up 3 nights with me when the leg went bad. That is the boy who called you a heifer in my hearing." "I understand. I do not think you do." "I do," Cora said. "He has been afraid for 2 years that you would die in the bed he carried you into. And now a woman has walked up your road and you are not dying anymore, and he does not know where he stands. That does not excuse him. It explains him." Holt was quiet for a long time. "Cora." "Yes. That is the most generous thing anyone has said about Denny since he was 12. I am not most people, she said. He almost smiled. No, he said. You are not. He did not say the line back to her. Not that night. The line was waiting somewhere between them like a coin. Neither of them had reached for yet, and she could feel it there, and she knew he could feel it there. And they sat on the bench in the long gold light, and did not touch, and did not speak again, until the sun was off the cottonwoods, and the air had turned blue. He almost told her about the leg. Has. He had told her about the leg, in a way. He had told her the shape of it. But he had not told her the part. He had not told anyone, which was the part where, lying in the snow for 2 hours, he had decided that needing anyone was the same as dying, and she felt the untold part sitting in him on the bench beside her. She did not ask for it. A woman who asks for the untold part has already taken it before it was given. She got up after a while and went in to start supper. He stayed on the bench. When she called him in, he came, and he ate. And he went out to the barn afterward, and she heard his crutch on the boards of the barn floor for a long time. And then she heard Denny's voice low, and the crutch on the boards again, and she did not know what was said, and she did not ask. And in the morning Denny brought her coffee. He did not knock. He set the tin cup on the porch rail outside the kitchen window, where she would see it when she opened the shutter. And he walked away across the yard with his hat in his hand, and he did not look back, and the coffee was hot and black and a little burnt at the bottom, because he had let it sit on the stove too long. And she drank it slowly, standing at the window, watching him saddle the sorrel and ride out toward the herd. He did not speak to her that day. He did not speak to her the next day. He brought her coffee both mornings and did not look at her, and did not speak, and Cora understood that she was being apologized to in the only language Denny had, and she let him apologize. Eleanor Hale rode out on the 9th day. Cora was in the side yard hanging sheets on the line, when she heard the buggy on the track, and she walked around the corner of the house with 2 clothespins still in her teeth, and saw a small, neat black buggy coming up the rise, driven by a small, neat woman in a gray dress, with her white hair pinned tight under a black bonnet. The woman drove like a woman who had been driving herself a long time. She brought the buggy to a stop at the porch, and set the brake, and looked down at Cora, and said, "You must be the woman the town is talking about." Wells. Cora took the clothespins out of her mouth. "I am Cora Whitmore, Eleanor Hale," the woman said. "My husband was the first cattle commissioner of this territory. He has been dead 9 years. I live 2 miles east of here, and I have known Holt Calder since he was 4 years old. And I have ridden out to look at the new woman, as we say. Though I expect you have already been looked at quite enough this week. I have, yes." Eleanor Hale's mouth did a small thing that was almost a smile. "Help me down, would you? The step is high and my hip is no longer a young hip." Cora helped her down. Eleanor Hale was a slight woman, no more than 100 pounds, and she put her gloved hand on Cora's forearm with the easy weight of a woman who had been put on and off of buggies by other women her whole life. And she stood on the ground and looked up at Cora's face. Up, because Cora was a full head taller, and looked at her for a long, careful moment. She said, "Ma'am. You may call me Eleanor. I expect we are going to know each other." She turned toward the porch. "Is he here?" "He's at the south pasture. He rode out an hour ago." "Good," Eleanor said. "Then we have time. Come up to the porch. I have brought you something, and I would rather not give it to you in front of him. Not yet." Cora's hands went still at her sides. She had not expected this. She had expected an inspection. She had expected polite, cool questions, and a polite, cool departure. And she had not expected a small, white-haired woman to come up onto the porch and sit down on the bench Cora had checked the cross-brace of, and reach into the basket at her feet and lift out a tin box the size of a Bible, dented at one corner with a faded blue ribbon tied around it twice. "This was Asa's," Eleanor said. "Asa Calder, Holt's father. Asa brought this to me in the spring of '78, 3 years before he died. He was a careful man. Careful the way some men are careful with horses. Careful the way other men are careful with their daughters. He brought me this box and he said, 'Eleanor, I am asking you to hold this for me.' I asked him why he was not giving it to Holt, and he said, 'Holt is a young man, and a young man does not know yet what to keep and what to spend.' He said, 'Hold it until a Calder needs it.' He said, 'You will know.'" Eleanor Hale set the tin box down on the bench between them. "I have been holding it 5 years," she said. "I rode out today to look at the woman the town is talking about, and I came up the rise and I saw the fence mended, and the cow and milk, and the wash on the line, and a woman in the side yard with clothespins in her teeth, and I thought, well, Asa. Here she is." Cora looked at the box. She did not touch it. "Mrs. Hale, Eleanor, I am the cook. I am not a Calder." "No," Eleanor said. "Not yet. That is not why I brought it." "Then why?" "Because Asa did not say a Calder would need it. Asa said a Calder would need it again. He used the word again. I did not understand what he meant at the time. I have come to understand it since. There are things on this place that have been wrong a long time, Miss Whitmore. I have watched Holt fail to see them, because he has been busy not dying. I have watched the town fail to see them, because the town has been busy not looking. Someone has to look. You walk like a woman who looks." Cora set her hand on the lid of the tin box. The metal was cool. She did not open it. "Eleanor." "Open it tonight," Eleanor said. "Open it when he is asleep or when he is out at the barn. Open it by yourself the first time. Read what is in it twice. Then decide what you will do." "What is in it?" "His father's careful papers," Eleanor said. "And one paper that was not his father's, which his father kept anyway, because his father knew what it was worth." She stood up. She did not let Cora help her into the buggy this time. She climbed up by herself, slow but steady, and she gathered her reins, and she looked down at Cora one more time. "I do not know what you are to him yet," Eleanor said. "Neither do you. Neither does he. That is not what matters today. What matters today is that you are the first person in 2 years who has stood on that porch and looked at him without flinching. And a man who is not flinched at is a man who might live, and a man who might live is a man who might fight, and there is a fight coming, Miss Whitmore. I have smelled it on the wind for a year. Now, open the box." She clucked to her horse. The buggy turned in the yard and went back down the rise. Cora stood on the porch with the tin box in her hands. She did not open it then. She carried it inside and into her small room, off the kitchen, and she set it on the floor of the wardrobe behind her trunk, and she closed the wardrobe door, and she went back outside and finished hanging the sheets, because the sheets did not know that anything had changed, and Holt would be back at midday and would want his dinner. That afternoon she walked the channel. She had been waiting for a day to walk the channel, and Eleanor Hale's visit had decided her. She told Holt at dinner that she was going to walk the south pasture fence after the dishes were done, and would not be back until dusk, and he looked at her across the table for a moment, and then nodded, because by the 9th day he had learned not to ask her where she was going or why. She put on her father's canvas trousers under her skirt. She had cut the skirt to be easy at the hips, because the ranch was teaching her she would need to bend and squat and kneel in it 3 times a day. And she put on her boots, and she took a canteen and she walked. The south pasture fence ran along the lower edge of the property, a mile from the house. She walked it east to west slowly, looking at the posts and the wire and the ground where the wire met the ground. And she found 3 more rotted posts, and a section where someone had cut the wire and retied it badly, and she made a note of that. She walked the channel. The channel was the thing. The channel ran down from the creek a half-mile to the north, along a shallow cut Asa Calder had dug by Cora's guess 20 years ago. She could read the age of the cut in the slope of the banks and the way the grass had come back over the spoil. And it brought creek water down into the south pasture, along a graded fall, so gentle she could not see the slope with her eye, but could see it in the way the water had once moved. The water had once moved. It was not moving now. She walked up the channel from the south end toward the creek. The first 100 yards, the channel was a thin brown trickle, the kind of trickle that comes from a wet bank, and nothing else. The next 100 yards, it was wet mud. The next 100 yards, it was damp earth. And then, 60 yards short of where the channel left the creek, she stopped, because the channel was not there anymore. Someone had filled it. Someone had filled it with packed clay. The clay was reddish and clean, and had been packed by hand with a flat tool, the marks of the tool still visible on the surface, and it had been packed within the last week because the top of the clay was still soft enough that her boot left a clear print. The fill ran for 40 feet. She walked the 40 feet on the bank above it. Slowly, counting, and at the upper end the channel had been cut off cleanly from the creek, with a small earthen dam no higher than her knee. The creek ran past the dam full and clean and untouched, on its way to no one's pasture. Cora stood on the bank in the slanting yellow light of late afternoon, and looked at the dam, and at the packed clay, and at the dry channel, running down toward the pasture, where Holt Calder's cattle were getting thinner by the week, and she felt something in her chest go cold and steady. The way her chest had gone cold and steady the day her father had told her he was dying, and she would have to bury him alone. She turned to walk back along the bank. That was when she saw the stakes. There were 4 of them, fresh pine, driven into the ground at the upper edge of the fill, 3 feet high, with red rag tied at the tops and small brass tags wired to them stamped with numbers. Survey stakes. Survey stakes driven into Calder ground. Survey stakes set on the Calder side of the property line, by 20 yards each, in a neat surveyor's row, marking a strip of land that ran from the creek down through the fill and into what had been, until last week, the upper end of the south pasture. She pulled the first stake out of the ground. The earth around it was loose. It came out cleanly, and she stood there, with it in her hands, and she breathed once and pulled the second stake, and then the third, and then the fourth. And she had all 4 of them in her arms when she heard the voices from the ridge above her. 2 voices. Men. She could not see them from where she stood, because the ridge was above her, and brush ran along the lip of it. But the wind was coming down off the ridge toward her, and it brought the voices clean, as if they had been speaking in the kitchen. At sunrise, one voice said, "The papers come at sunrise. Don't be out where the marshal can see you." That was a voice she did not know. A man's voice. Older. Dry. The voice of a man who had practiced sounding like a banker. That was Denny's voice. Cora went very still on the bank. She did not move. She did not breathe loud. She held the 4 stakes against her chest. "He cannot pay," the older voice said. "He cannot pay, and he cannot ride, and he has been holding on by his teeth for a year, and he will not last the week without water. The cripple won't last the week without water, boy. You understand me? Don't get tender on me now. You've taken my coin for 8 months. Yes, sir. Sunrise. The papers come at sunrise. You be in the barn, or you be at the herd, I don't care which, but you be where you can swear you weren't in the house. After it's done, you'll have your wage, and a piece besides, and you can ride south, and start over, and never see this country again. You hear me, boy?" "I hear you, Mr. Marsh." A pause. A long pause. the kind of pause a man makes when he has just said his own name aloud, where he should not have said it. Don't use my name out here. Sorry, sir. Sunrise, yes, sir? There was the sound of boots moving on the dry grass of the ridge. There were 2 sets of boots, one going east and one going west, and Cora stood on the bank below them with 4 survey stakes in her arms and the channel dry behind her, and the creek running full to her right, and the late sun on her face, and she did not move, and she did not breathe loud, and she did not speak. When the boots were gone, when she had counted to 200 slowly in her head the way her father had taught her to count when a thing had frightened her, she shifted the stakes in her arms and stepped down off the bank and started back toward the house. She walked the half-mile to the house without hurrying. She did not hurry because a woman seen hurrying across a pasture in the last light with 4 pulled survey stakes in her arms was a woman. A watcher on a ridge would remember, and she did not yet know who was watching. She walked at the pace of a woman who had finished her fence inspection and was going in to start supper. She kept the stakes against her chest, where her shawl half covered them. She did not look back at the ridge. In her head she was already moving. In her head she was already at the kitchen table with the lamp lit. In her head she was already in her small room off the kitchen, opening the wardrobe, lifting Eleanor Hale's tin box from behind her trunk. In her head she was already at the roll-top desk in the front room, rolling the warped wood up slow, taking out the green ledger with the careful hand that had stopped on the 11th of February 1882, and laying it on the table beside the tin. She was already turning the pages of the ledger backward, looking for a date she did not yet know, looking for a name she had just learned. Marsh, don't use my name out here. The papers come at sunrise. The cripple won't last the week without water. The sun was almost down behind the cottonwoods when she came up the rise into the yard. Holt was on the porch. He had pulled the chair out from the front room and was sitting in it with his bad leg stretched out and a tin cup in his hand, and he watched her come up the track with the stakes in her arms, and his face did the slow, soft thing it had done in the kitchen doorway on the first night. And then it stopped doing the soft thing because he saw what she was carrying. Cora, Holt, what are those survey stakes? They were driven into your south pasture inside the property line, 20 yards over, in a row from the creek down through the channel. The channel has been filled. Someone packed 40 feet of it with clay within the last week, and dammed the head of it where it leaves the creek. Your water has been cut off on purpose. Your cattle are dying on purpose. And a man named Marsh is paying Denny to keep quiet about it. And the foreclosure papers come at sunrise. He did not speak. He sat in the chair on the porch, and he looked at her standing at the bottom of the steps with 4 fresh pine stakes in her arms and a smear of red clay on her sleeve, and his face did a thing she could not name and would think about later. And the last light of the sun went off the top of the cottonwoods, and the yard went blue, and a single jay called once from the barn roof, and nothing else made a sound. "Cora," he said. "We have one night," she said. She came up the steps with the stakes in her arms, and she did not flinch, and she did not cry, and she did not ask him whether he would fight, because the asking would have been a small thing, and the night was not going to be small. She set the stakes down on the boards of the porch, beside his chair, 4 pine stakes with red rags at the tops and small brass tags wired to them, stamped with numbers. And she straightened up to her full height in the blue light, and she looked at the closed front door of the house she had walked into 9 days ago, and she put her hand on the latch. "Inside," she said. "Bring the lamp, Paul." He came up out of the chair with a slow, hard movement she had learned to read across 9 days, the hand on the rail, the crutch set, the bad leg taking what it could, and the good leg taking the rest. He did not say anything about the stakes. He picked up the lamp from the porch table with his free hand, and he carried it past her through the door she had opened, and the light went into the front room ahead of him, and made the long shadow of the crutch lie down across the floorboards. Cora carried the stakes in behind him. She did not set them in the corner. She laid them out on the long kitchen table in a row, 4 of them, red rags up, brass tags out, the way a man lays out cartridges before he loads. Then she went to the stove, and opened the door, and put 2 more pieces of pine on the coals, because the night was going to be long and a cold kitchen does not help a person think. "Sit down," she said. "I can stand." "You can," she said. "But you'll think better sitting." He looked at her for a moment the way a man looks at a thing he is trying to decide whether to argue with, and then he pulled the chair out from the head of the table and sat. He set the crutch against the table edge. He set the lamp in the middle of the table, between the stakes and the place where she was about to put down the tin box. She brought it from the shelf where she had set it that morning, when Eleanor pressed it into her hands. It was a small tin, dented on one corner, the lid painted a dull green that had once been bright. She set it down. She did not open it yet. "Your father's drawer," she said. "The one in the office." "Where's the key?" "On the nail behind the clock." "All right." She went and got it. She came back and set it on the table beside the tin. Then she sat down across from him in the chair. She had been sitting in every supper for 9 days. And she put her hands flat on the wood on either side of the lamp, and she looked at him. "Holt," she said, "I am going to open these. I am going to read what is in them. If what I find is what I think I am going to find, then by morning we are going to know whether your father left you something to fight with. I want you to hear me say that out loud before I open the lid. Because once I open it, we are in it." "We're already in it," he said. "We are," she said. "I just wanted you to say it." He looked at the tin. He looked at the row of stakes. He looked at her face, in the lamp, with the blue night behind the window glass. "Open it," he said. She lifted the lid. The papers inside had been folded so long the creases had gone yellow. There was a smell of cedar shavings, and old paper, and something faintly like pipe smoke, the way a thing smells when a man has handled it carefully for many years, and then put it away in a box and left it. On top was a single sheet, folded in thirds, and when she unfolded it the seal at the bottom was still legible. A notary's stamp, pressed into red wax, cracked at the rim but whole in the middle, and a date written in clean copperplate hand. April the 17th, 1861. She read it through once to herself before she read it aloud. She wanted to know what she was holding before she gave it to him. It was the filing. It was the original filing. It named James Calder of Bitter Creek as the holder of perpetual water rights to the creek that ran through the south pasture and to the diverted channel that fed the lower fields, witnessed by 2 men whose signatures she did not recognize, and notarized by a man whose stamp said his office had been in the territorial capital in those years. There was a hand-drawn plat folded behind it, and the plat showed the creek and the channel and the boundary lines of Calder land. And at the bottom of the plat, in a different hand, a more careful hand, an older hand, someone had written in pencil, very small, the words "Keep this" and the date 1879. She set the filing down on the table. She unfolded the plat next to it. She set the lamp where it could light both. "Look," she said. Holt looked. He did not lean forward. He sat very still in the chair, and he looked at the paper the way a man looks at a face he had not expected to see again. He did not touch it. He put his hand flat on the table beside it, and left it there. "That's his hand," he said. "The pencil, that's his hand. I know. He never told me. He told Eleanor," she said. "He told Eleanor to give it to a Calder, when a Calder needed it. He must have known." Known what? Known that someone would come for the water one day. He did not say anything to that for a while. He looked at his father's hand on the paper. She did not crowd him. She turned back to the tin and lifted out what was under the filing. A thinner sheaf, 3 sheets clipped at the corner with a brass clip gone green with age, and below those a single receipt folded once. The 3 sheets were incorporation records, articles of incorporation for the Western Plains Surveying Company, filed in the territorial capital in the spring of 1880. The first sheet named the company and its stated purpose. The second sheet named the partners of record. 3 men, none of whom she recognized. The third sheet, attached behind the other 2, and folded so it would not catch a careless eye, was a supplementary filing. The kind a man might make late and quietly when the territorial office was understaffed and not minded to look twice. It named the silent partner. It named Aldous Marsh. It named him for 1/2 of the controlling interest, and it was signed in his own hand, and it was dated June of 1880, 3 months after his name had been left off the public filing. Cora set it on the table next to the 1861 filing and the plat. She set the receipt next to that, and their eye. The receipt was for $1,200, paid by Aldous Marsh to the same Western Plains Surveying Company in the autumn of 1882, last autumn, for services to be rendered, Bitter Creek Township, parcels adjoining Calder. She put her hand over the receipt. She left it there. "He owns the surveyors," she said quietly. "He owns the men who are driving stakes into your land. He paid them last fall to come this spring." Holt was looking at the papers. He was looking at the receipt and at the supplementary filing, and at his father's plat, and at the seal pressed into wax, 1861, and the lamp was on his face, and the part of his face she had not been able to name on the porch was now a thing she could name. It was not anger. It was a man waking up. "Cora," he said. "I'm here. How long do we have?" "They serve at sunrise," she said. "So we have until sunrise to know what we're holding. Then we have however long after that it takes to put it in front of someone who has the authority to look at it. The land office. The land office. Yes, but not just the clerk, the assessor. The county assessor. Eleanor will know his name. We need a man who can freeze a transfer, not a man who can stamp a paper." "Hennessy," he said. "What?" "The assessor. Hennessy. He used to come out here when my father was alive. He sat at this table." He put a finger on the wood. "Right here. He told my father once he thought Marsh was crooked. My father told him to bring proof or stop talking. Then Hennessy is the man," she said. "Hennessy is the man." She looked at the window. The blue had gone out of it. The glass was black now, and the lamp was making 2 of her in the pane. One upright at the table, and one hanging upside down off the upright one, the way a reflection will when the lamp is between you and the dark. "All right," she said. "I am going to write 3 things tonight. I am going to copy the filing in my own hand, so there is a copy if anything happens to the original. I am going to write down everything I saw and heard from that ridge, so it is on paper while it is fresh. And I am going to write a letter to Eleanor Hale that you will sign, asking her to come at first light and to bring the assessor with her." "I'll write the letter all right, Cora." "Yes. Sit a minute." She had been about to get up for the ink. She sat back down. She put her hands in her lap. "You came up that track 9 days ago," he said. "I told you to leave." "You did. You didn't." "No, why?" She thought about that. The lamp was steady. The stove had taken the fresh pine, and the kitchen was warm now, in the way a kitchen is warm, at the center, and cool at the edges. She did not give him the easy answer. She gave him the answer she had, which was the harder one. "Because you looked at me," she said. He did not say anything. "In the doorway," she said. "When you told me you'd made a mistake. You looked at me. You didn't look past me. The freight clerk that morning looked past me. The men in the street looked past me. You looked at me, and you told me to go away. But you looked at me when you said it. That was the thing about you, Holt. You were the first man in that town who saw I was standing there. That. He looked down at the table. He moved his hand, the one that had been flat beside the filing, and he laid 2 fingers on the brass tag on the nearest stake, and he turned it so the stamped number caught the lamp. I'm not most men, he said. It was not loud. It was not a speech. He said it the way he would have said the weather was turning, and he did not look up when he said it. And she felt the words go down inside her and settle the way a stone settles in still water. She let the quiet sit between them for a breath. Then she got up, and got the ink and the pen and the paper from the office, and she came back, and she did not say anything more about what he had said, because she was not going to make him say it twice. She copied the filing first. She wrote slowly, in the round, careful hand her father had taught her, and she did not allow her pen to shake even when her hand wanted to. She copied every word, every date, every signature. She copied the notary's seal as a small circle with the words inside it. When she was done, she folded the copy and set it on the table next to the original, and she set the original back into the tin. She wrote her own account next. She wrote what she had seen from the lower fence line, the channel packed shut with clay, the 4 pine stakes with red rags, the brass tags. She wrote what she had heard from the ridge in Marsh's voice. The cripple won't last the week without water. She wrote that down in his words because his words were the thing that mattered, and she signed it with her full name and the date and the hour. Holt wrote the letter to Eleanor, or Shin. He wrote it short. He wrote it in a hand that had not been used much in 2 years, blocky and slow. And he signed it Holt Calder, and he asked her, in 2 sentences, to come at first light and to bring the assessor, and to bring whatever she had been saving for him. Cora folded both letters together. She blew out the second lamp she had brought into the room for the ink, and the kitchen went down to 1 lamp only, the one between them on the table. I'll ride them out, she said. Now, it's 2 hours to the Hale place. If I leave now, I am there before the moon sets, and I am back here before the marshal is. You can't ride the bay in the dark. I can, she said. I rode my father's plow horse 3 miles to a doctor in the dark when I was 12 years old. I can ride yours too. He did not argue. He watched her put on her shawl. He watched her put the letters inside her dress against her body, where no rain and no fall could reach them. He watched her go to the door, and he said, just before she went out, "Take the rifle." "I'll take the rifle, Cora." "Yes." "Come back." "I will," she said, and she went out. She rode the bay along the south track at a slow trot, the rifle across her thighs, the moon a quarter full over her right shoulder, and she did not allow herself to think about the morning. She thought about the road. She thought about the next mile. Well, the bay was a good horse, and a quiet one, and he did not mind her weight on him. She had learned that the first day, when Holt had said half bitter, half curious, that she rode lighter than she looked, and she had said back, evenly, that most things were lighter than people decided they were. She came down the ridge to the Hale place a little after midnight. There was a lamp burning in Eleanor's kitchen window, which did not surprise her, because Eleanor had been a cattle commissioner's wife for 40 years, and she did not sleep through other people's troubles. Cora tied the bay at the rail, and went to the door, and Eleanor opened it before she knocked. "Come in, child," Eleanor said. "I have been waiting since supper. I knew it would be tonight. How did you know?" "How?" "Because I was married to a man who understood Aldous Marsh, and Aldous Marsh always moves at the new moon. Sit down, I'll put coffee on. Tell me what you found." Cora told her. She told her in order, plain, without drama. She unfolded the copy of the filing on Eleanor's kitchen table, and she set the incorporation records out in her own words. And she watched Eleanor's face go still, in the way a face goes still when a long-held suspicion is finally proved. "He's the silent partner," Eleanor said. "He is, of the survey company." "Yes. That has been driving stakes through the Hadley place, and the old Briggs ground, and now the Calder line." "Yes." Eleanor sat down. She put both her hands palm down on her own table for a moment, and then she got up again. And she went to a roll-top desk in the corner of the room, and she opened a drawer Cora could not see into, and she took out a packet of papers tied with cotton string. "Hadley's brother gave me these, in 1879, she said. "He said his brother had been cheated, and he could not prove it, and he asked me to keep them, because he was leaving the territory, and he did not trust the men in town. I kept them. I have kept them 4 years. I did not know what to do with them. I do now." She set the packet down next to Cora's filing. "And I will fetch Hennessy at first light," she said. "I will go myself. He sleeps 3 miles from here. He is an early man, and he will not refuse me. We will come together to the Calder place by 7. "Thank you. Do not thank me, child. I should have done this 4 years ago. I was afraid of him. I was an old woman, afraid of a younger man, and I have been ashamed of it since the day Hadley's brother left the territory, and I am not going to be ashamed of it for another day." "Eleanor, yes?" "He said on the ridge," Marsh said. "He said the cripple won't last the week without water." Eleanor's face did the thing Holt's face had done on the porch. The thing Cora had not been able to name then. She named it now. It was a woman waking up. "Go," Eleanor said. "Ride back. Tell Holt Calder I am coming with Hennessy at sunrise." "Tell him," Eleanor Hale said. "She has been keeping her husband's silence for him, and she is done keeping it." "Go," Cora went. She came back into the Calder yard a little before 3 in the morning. The lamp was still in the kitchen window. Holt was still at the table. He had not moved the stakes. He had not moved the papers. He had set out 2 cups, and there was coffee in the pot on the stove, and he had not poured it because he had been waiting to pour it with her. She sat down. He poured. The kitchen smelled like coffee and pine and old paper and the faint, clean cold the night had brought in on her shawl. "She'll come," Cora said. "She'll bring Hennessy." She had a packet of Hadley's papers in her desk. 4 years she's been keeping them. And she's bringing those too. Hadley? His brother left them with her in 79. Hadley lost his ranch in 79. "I know." He looked at the coffee. He turned the cup a quarter turn on the table. "Cora," he said, "if Hennessy comes, and Hennessy looks at this, and Hennessy will not freeze the transfer." "He will." "If he will not, then we go above him. There is always someone above. We do not stop at the first man who says no. That is how Marsh has won every other time. People stopped at the first man who said no." He nodded once. He drank his coffee. They did not sleep. They sat in the kitchen until the window began to gray, and they did not talk much. And they did not need to. She got up once, went out to the barn and fed the horses, because the horses did not know there was a hearing coming, and they were going to want their hay either way. She came back in and washed her hands and put fresh wood on the stove, and at a little after 5, she heard a horse coming up the track at a run. It was Denny. He came into the yard at a hard gallop, and he was off the horse before the horse stopped. And he came up the porch steps, 2 at a time. And when Cora opened the door for him, his face was the color of skim milk, and his eyes were the eyes of a boy who had not slept. "Ma'am," he said. "Ma'am, I have to tell." "Come in, Denny," she said. "Sit at the table. Mr. Calder is at the table. Tell us both." He came in. He took his hat off. He sat down across from Holt, and he could not look at Holt at first. And Cora poured him a cup of coffee, and set it in front of him, and put her hand on his shoulder for 1 second. And then she took her hand off, and sat down next to Holt. And Denny told them. He told them everything. He told them Marsh had paid him $20 in September to ride the south fence line and report which posts were rotting. He told them Marsh had paid him $40 in October to leave the gate to the upper channel open one night, which he had done, and the channel had silted at the bend, and that had been the first thing. He told them he had not known the second thing, the clay packing, until he had seen it 3 days ago, and he had not known the third thing, the foreclosure, until he had heard Marsh say it on the ridge, with his own ears, the way Cora had heard it. "I called you a name," he said to Cora, and his voice cracked on it. "I called you a name in the yard the first day. I am ashamed of it. I've been ashamed of it since the day Mr. Carr's. Calder hollered at me, and I was going to tell you I was sorry next week sometime. And I waited too long. So I am telling you now. I am sorry I called you that. I am sorry I took his money. I will tell the assessor everything I did. I will tell the marshal everything I did. I will sign whatever you put in front of me. I will not run." Holt did not say anything. He looked at the boy a long moment. Cora looked at Holt and waited. "Denny," Holt said finally, "did you fill the channel?" "No, sir, I left a gate open. I did not fill a channel. The channel was filled by 2 men who came up from the south track in a wagon 3 nights ago. I saw them from the bunkhouse window. I did not go down. I should have. I did not." "All right," Holt said. That was all he said. He did not forgive the boy, and he did not curse him. He said all right, and he meant it the way a man means it when he has decided to keep a thing for later. Denny took it the way it was given, which was as a chance. Cora set a piece of paper in front of him. She set the pen and the ink beside it. "Write it down," she said. "All of it. Names, dates, dollars. What you did, what you saw, what you heard. Sign it. Eleanor and the assessor will be here in 2 hours and they will meet it in your hand." He wrote, with a sigh. He wrote slowly and badly, the way a boy writes who has not been schooled past 12. But he wrote it all, and when he was done, he signed his name, large, at the bottom of the second page, and he pushed the pages across the table to her and she folded them with the other letters. Eleanor and Hennessy came up the track at 7, the buggy moving fast for a buggy, and Hennessy on horseback alongside it. Hennessy was a tall man in his 50s with a long jaw and a careful mouth, and he came up onto the porch in the manner of a man who had spent 30 years on porches and knew not to track the kitchen, and Cora met him at the door and showed him in. He sat at the table. He did not say much at first. He looked at the 1861 filing for a long time without touching it. He looked at the plat. He looked at the incorporation records, and the supplementary filing and the receipt for $1,200. And his careful mouth got more careful. And then he looked at Denny's statement, and then he looked at Cora's, and then he looked at Holt, and then he looked at Eleanor. "Mrs. Hale," he said. "Mr. Hennessy, you have been keeping things." "I have. Some of them 4 years. Some of them. You might have told me sooner." "I might have. I was afraid. I am not now." "All right," he said, "and that all right." Was the word Holt's had been the night before, the word a man uses when he has decided to keep a thing for later, and Eleanor took it the way it was given, which was as a forgiveness and a forward step at the same time. Hennessy turned to Holt. "Mr. Calder, the marshal is going to come up that track in less than an hour to serve a foreclosure notice. He will serve it. I cannot stop him from serving paper. What I can do, with what you have on this table, is petition the land office to freeze the underlying transfer pending a hearing on the water rights and the survey. I will write that petition now, in your kitchen, and I will sign it as county assessor, and I will hand it to the marshal when he gets here. The marshal will then have a piece of paper that contradicts the piece of paper he is carrying. He will not know which one to obey. He will go back to town and ask, and that will give us until tomorrow. Tomorrow, Holt said. Tomorrow, Hennessy said. And tomorrow, we will have the hearing. The hearing must be public. Marsh's strength is that he does his business in closed rooms. We will not give him a closed room. We will use the land office in town. I will see to it that the notice goes up by noon. Every man in Bitter Creek who can read will know there is a hearing in the morning. Will they come? They will come, Mr. Calder. They will come to watch you lose. They will stay to watch what they did not expect. He wrote the petition there at the table. He used Cora's ink. When he was done, he signed it, and Eleanor signed it as witness, and he folded it and put it in his coat. The marshal came up the track at 8:15. He was a square gray-mustached man named Pike, and he had been the marshal in Bitter Creek for 11 years, and he was not a corrupt man. He was only a tired one, and a tired man does what the paper in his hand tells him to do. He came up onto the porch with a foreclosure notice in one hand and his hat in the other, and Hennessy met him on the porch and handed him the petition. Pike read it. He read it twice. He looked at Hennessy, and at Eleanor behind him in the kitchen door, and at Cora behind Eleanor, and at Holt behind Cora, at the table, and his tired face did a small thing that was almost a smile, and almost was not. Hennessy, he said, Marshal, you are telling me to take this back to town and ask I am. All right. He folded both papers together, the petition and the foreclosure notice, and he put them inside his coat the way Cora had put her letters inside her dress the night before. And he tipped his hat to Eleanor, and he rode back down the track without nailing anything to the gate. That was when Marsh accelerated. By noon, his men were on the south pasture. They came in a body of 6, riding 2 abreast, and they cut the south fence at the corner and began driving the cattle off the dry ground for their own welfare, which is what their foreman shouted across the wire when Cora and Denny rode down. The cattle were thin and slow and went easily. The foreman was a man Cora had not seen before, a younger man with bad eyes, and he would not meet hers. We are taking them to water, he said. You are taking them to Marsh's pens, she said. We are taking them to water, ma'am, on behalf of the bank, pending the foreclosure. There is no foreclosure yet, she said. The marshal turned around at the porch this morning. He has the petition. He has gone to ask. You drive these cattle off this land today and tomorrow morning. At the hearing I will name you by your face, and Mr. Hennessy will write your name down in the record, and you will not work in this county again. The foreman looked at her. He looked at her the way the freight clerk had looked at her 9 days ago, and then he looked again, the way the freight clerk had not, and something in his eyes shifted.
Ma'am,
he said, I have a wife and 3. Then go home to them, she said, and tomorrow, when you are asked who hired you, tell the truth. He sat his horse a long moment. Then he wheeled it and called to his men. And they pulled off the cattle, and the cattle, confused, stood in the dust where they were and lowed at the dry ground. Cora and Denny moved them slowly back up to the near pasture where the creek still ran, and that took the rest of the afternoon, and her shoulders by the end of it were a single hot bar of ache from the neck down, and she did not say so. They worked the next day and a half on the case. Hennessy came back out twice. Eleanor came back out and stayed. They sat at the long kitchen table, and they laid out the evidence in the order they would lay it on the land office table, the 1861 filing first, then the plat, then the incorporation records, then the supplementary filing naming Marsh, then the $1,200 receipt. Then Denny's statement, in his bad handwriting with his name signed large, then Cora's account of the ridge in her round careful hand. Then the 4 pine stakes, with the red rags and the brass tags laid across the bottom like a closing argument. Holt sat at the head of the table the whole time. He did not say much. He answered questions when Hennessy asked them. He signed where his name was needed. The second afternoon, when Cora was loading the evidence into a leather satchel of his father's that she had found behind the office door, he watched her work. And he said, quietly, so only she could hear, "I would have lost it. You haven't yet. I would have, if you had not come up that track." "I came up the track." "Yes, then you didn't." He did not answer that. He looked at the satchel. He looked at the row of stakes. Then he said, still quietly, "Cora. Tomorrow, after the hearing, if we win it, when we win it, I have things to say to you." All right. That was the only romance of those 2 days. That was the whole of it. She did not look at him longer than she needed to when he said it. She buckled the satchel and went out to feed the horses. Because the hearing was at 10 in the morning and the wagon had to be ready by 8. The morning of the hearing was bright and cold. The sky over Bitter Creek was the hard blue it gets in late September, when the nights have begun to turn and the days have not yet. Cora drove the wagon down the track with Holt beside her on the seat. She had asked him plain whether he wanted to drive. And he had said plain that he did not, that he wanted her hands on the reins, because it was her case as much as his. And she had taken the reins without argument and without remark. Eleanor came behind them in her buggy. Hennessy was already in town. The street outside the land office was full. It was fuller than Cora had ever seen Bitter Creek. Word had moved the way. Word moves in a small town when there is a thing to watch. And the men who would not have walked across the street to greet Holt Calder a month ago were standing 4 deep on the boardwalk with their hands in their pockets and their hats pushed back. And the women who would not have spoken Cora's name a week ago were standing with them. And Cora, climbing down from the wagon, did not look at any of them. She went around to Holt's side, and she put her hand on his elbow, and she helped him down the way she had helped him down 100 times in the yard, and she did it in front of every eye in Bitter Creek. And she did not flinch, and she did not hurry, and Holt set his crutch and stood up. And they went into the land office together with Eleanor a step behind them and the satchel in Cora's hand. The room was the largest room in the building, and it was not large enough. Men stood along the walls. The territorial land agent, a thin man named Brooks, sat at the long table at the front with Hennessy beside him, in his capacity as county assessor and a clerk on Brooks's other side with a ledger open. Marsh was already there. He sat in the front row in a black coat, a small, neat man with a small, neat mustache and a watch chain across his vest, and he had 2 lawyers with him from the territorial capital, and he did not look at Cora when she came in. He looked at Holt. He looked at Holt with the small, pleased look of a man who has come to watch a horse he has already shot. Brooks called the matter. He read the foreclosure notice into the record. He read the surveyor's report that Marsh's company had filed naming the south pasture as land not adequately serviced by water, under the terms of some clause Marsh's lawyers had written. He asked whether the holder of the title wished to be heard. Cora stepped forward before Holt could. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "my name is Cora Whitmore. I am housekeeper at the Calder Ranch, and I am here at Mr. Calder Ranch. Calder's request to lay certain papers before this office. Mr. Calder will speak after." Brooks looked at her. He looked at her in the small, uncertain way men look at a woman who has spoken in a room they did not expect her to speak in. Then he looked past her at Hennessy, and Hennessy nodded once, and Brooks said, "Proceed, ma'am." She set the satchel on the table. She unbuckled it. She took out the 1861 filing first, and she laid it in front of Brooks. And she said, "The original water rights filing for the creek and the diverted channel that run through the Calder property. Filed April the 17th, 1861, by James Calder. Notarized in the territorial capital. Witnessed by 2 parties whose signatures are attached. The rights are perpetual and they have never been challenged in any court of this territory. She laid the plat down next to it. The original surveyor's plat, in James Calder's hand, with the channel marked, and the boundary lines noted. He kept it himself, and gave it for safekeeping to Eleanor Hale in 1879. Mrs. Hale will testify to its provenance. She laid the incorporation records down next. The articles of incorporation of the Western Plains Surveying Company, the company whose stakes presently stand on Calder land, filed in the spring of 1880. The name partners are these three men. She put her finger on the names. Brooks, read them. And this, Cora said, and she laid the supplementary filing down, is the supplementary filing of June 1880, also filed in the territorial capital, naming the silent partner who holds 1/2 of the controlling interest in the company. Mr. Brooks, I would ask you to read the name aloud. Brooks read it. He read it aloud. Aldous Marsh. The room did a thing. It was not loud. It was a small noise, a dozen small noises at once. The noise a room makes when 100 breaths are taken at the same time. Cora did not turn to look at Marsh. She did not have to. She heard the wood of his chair creak as he shifted his weight. She laid the receipt down. A receipt for $1,200 paid by Mr. Marsh, personally to the company he silently owns, dated last autumn, for services to be rendered. Bitter Creek Township, parcels adjoining Calder. The parcels adjoining Calder, Mr. Brooks, are the parcels Mr. Potter Marsh has been buying for 2 years. She laid Hadley's brother's packet down, from 1879. The papers of the late Mr. Hadley, whose ranch Mr. Marsh acquired in the same manner. Mrs. Hale held these in trust. She will testify to their provenance also. She did not stop. She did not let the room get its breath back. She laid Denny's statement down. A sworn statement by Mr. Bohr. A sworn statement by Mr. Core. A sworn statement. Dennis Riley, ranch hand at the Calder place, taken 3 mornings ago at the Calder kitchen table. Mr. Riley will read it himself. Denny. Denny stood up from the second row. His face was the color of skim milk again, but his hands did not shake. He came forward and he took the paper from Cora, and he turned to face Brooks and not Marsh. And he read it through, in his bad handwriting. And he did not skip the parts that shamed him. He read the $20. He read the gate he had left open. He read the words he had heard on the ridge, the cripple won't last the week without water, and when he read those words, the room did the small noise again. And a woman somewhere along the wall said, audibly, "Oh, my Lord." Cora laid her own statement down after his. She did not read it. She did not need to. Brooks read it himself, with his head down over the table, and when he looked up, his careful mouth was very careful. "Mr. Marsh," Brooks said. Marsh's senior lawyer rose. He began to speak about the inadmissibility of supplementary filings procured under unusual circumstances, and the chain of custody of the Hale documents, and a number of other things that were words and not answers, and he had been speaking for perhaps 2 minutes when Eleanor Hale stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. She was 71 years old, and she had been the wife of the territory's first cattle commissioner for 40 years. And when she stood up in a room, every man in that room remembered, even the ones too young to have known her husband, that this was a woman whose word had weight. "Mr. Brooks," Eleanor said, "I will speak now, and the gentleman from the capital will sit down, or I will go to the territorial capital myself next week and ask why he is in this county." He sat down. "I have lived in Bitter Creek for 43 years, Eleanor said. "I knew James Calder. I knew the man who notarized that filing in 1861. I held those papers in trust at James Calder's request from 1879 until last week, when I gave them to Miss Whitmore, because Miss Whitmore had earned them. I held the Hadley papers in trust from 1879 until this morning, and I am ashamed I held them so long, and I will not be ashamed any longer." She turned. She did not look at Brooks anymore. She looked at Marsh. "Aldous," she said, "I have watched you buy this valley parcel by parcel for 10 years. I have watched you take the Hadley place, and the Briggs place, and the lower half of the Olson place, and I have watched you do it with stakes driven in the night and surveys written by men you owned, and I have said nothing, because I was an old woman and I was alone in a house, and I told myself there was nothing one old woman could do. I was wrong. There was one thing I could do. I could stand up in a room and name you. I am naming you. You are a thief, Aldous. You have been a thief in this valley since the year my husband died. Every man in this room knows it. I am sorry it took me 4 years to say it out loud." She sat down. The room did not make a noise this time. The room did not need to. The thing in the room had shifted, and everyone in it could feel the shifting, the way a wagon feels when the load slides. Brooks looked down at the papers on his table for a long moment. Hennessy was still beside him, not saying anything, letting the papers speak. Brooks lifted his pen. "The transfer is frozen," he said, "pending a full territorial review of the survey filings, the water rights filings, and the conduct of the Western Plains Surveying Company. Pending that review, I am also directing the marshal to investigate the matters laid before this office today, beginning with the receipt for $1,200 and the sworn statement of Mr. Riley. The foreclosure on the Calder property is stayed indefinitely. Mr. Marsh, you will remain in this county and make yourself available to the marshal." He set the pen down. Marshal Pike, standing at the back of the room, with his hat in his hand, walked up the center aisle, and he did not look at Holt. He turned his horse toward Marsh, in the sense that a marshal does. He walked the last 3 steps to Marsh's chair, and he laid a hand on the back of it gently, and he said, in his tired voice, "Mr. Marsh, step outside with me, please." Marsh stood up. He stood up slowly, and his small, neat face had gone the color of the inside of an oyster shell, and he did not look at Cora, and he did not look at Holt, and he did not look at Eleanor. He looked at his lawyer. His lawyer was already putting papers into a case. Marsh walked out of the land office with Pike a half-step behind him, and the men along the wall parted for him without a word, and the door closed behind him, and the room let out the breath it had been holding for an hour. Cora gathered the papers off the table. She did it slowly. She did not look at the room. Holt was beside her, and she felt him beside her without looking at him. The way you feel a stove warm at your back. Eleanor came up and put her hand briefly on Cora's arm and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say in front of the town, and then Eleanor went out to her buggy. Hennessy shook Holt's hand. He shook Cora's hand. He shook Denny's hand. He said low, "There will be more of this, tomorrow and next week and next month. But the back of it is broken. The back of it is broken today." "Thank you," Holt said. "Thank her," Hennessy said. He nodded toward Cora. "And thank Mrs. Hale. I have been waiting 4 years for a woman to walk into my office, with paper instead of complaint, and 2 of them did it in the same room." Cora drove the wagon home. The street was still full when they came out, but it was a different fullness. The men along the boardwalk did not look past her now. They looked at her. One old man, a man she did not know, took his hat off as the wagon passed him, and he did not say anything, and she nodded to him, and he put his hat back on. 2 women on the corner watched her pass, and one of them lifted her hand in a small wave, the way a woman waves at another woman. She has decided that morning to know. Cora lifted her hand back. They came up the track to the ranch in the late afternoon. The sun was off the cottonwoods already, and the yard was beginning to go blue, the way it had gone blue the night she had carried the stakes up the porch steps. But it was a different blue this time because she was not carrying anything up the steps, and she was not afraid of the door at the top of them. Quote, Tay. Holt did not go inside. He sat down on the porch in his chair. He set the crutch against the rail. He looked out across the yard at the south pasture, where the cattle she and Denny had moved back up to the creek, stood in a loose brown line along the near fence. He looked at the dry channel beyond them, packed with clay, the 4 stakes pulled now, and the red rags long since burned in her stove. Cora, he said, sit. She sat on the bench beside his chair. She did not sit close, and she sat where she had been sitting, for 9 evenings, which was an arm's length away, and she put her hands in her lap. He was quiet a long time. The yard went a deeper blue. A jay called from the barn roof once, the way the jay had called the night. She had come up the steps with the stakes, and she thought he had picked the moment for it on purpose, because he was a man who noticed things like that even if he never said so. I told you 9 days ago I didn't need anyone, he said. I remember, I meant it. I know. I was wrong. She did not say anything. She let him keep going. That was the thing about Holt. He needed the room to keep going. I have been a man on a porch for 2 years, he said. I have been a man waiting for the rest of it to fall on me. The horse fell on me, and I decided the rest of it was going to fall on me too. And I sat on this porch, and I waited. I did not write back to my sister in Missouri. I did not answer the letter the Cattlemen's Association sent me last March. I did not ride down to the Hale place when Eleanor's husband died, and he was the best friend my father ever had, and I did not ride down. I sat on this porch. I told myself I was alone because I was crippled. I was alone because I had decided to be. Holt. Let me finish, all right. Then you came up that track. I told you to go. You did not go. You set your bag down on these boards, and you said you would start with supper, and I sat in this chair, and I watched you carry your bag into a kitchen that had not been clean in 18 months. And I told myself you would last a week. You lasted 9 days. In 9 days you put the fence back, you put the milk cow back, you read the ledger drawer I had not opened, you read the south pasture I could not ride. You walked the back fence at dusk and you found the thing 2 grown men had filled in by night, and you came up these steps with 4 stakes in your arms. And you did not ask me whether I would fight, because you had already decided we were going to fight, and you carried me into the fight. You carried yourself. I did not. I would have lost this place. I would have lost it sitting in this chair. I am saying it plain, Cora, because if I do not say it plain, I will not say it at all, and I have spent 2 years not saying things plain. I would have lost it. You saved it. You saved it because you would not leave. She did not say anything to that. She did not trust herself to. She looked at the south pasture. She let him have the room. I am going to ask you 2 things, he said. I am going to ask them, plain. I am going to ask you to stay. I am going to ask you to marry me. I am asking you because I want to, and because I am not most men, and because I have not wanted anything in 2 years. And I want this. And I am asking you plain, because you deserve to be asked. Plain by a man who is sitting in his chair and looking at his porch boards and not pretending he is a different kind of man than he is. That is the asking. You can take whatever time you need. She took her time. She took perhaps a full minute. She watched a small wind move down the line of cottonwoods at the far edge of the yard. And she watched the cattle along the near fence shift their weight one by one. And she watched the blue of the sky go from blue to the color. A piece of slate is when you hold it up against a lamp. I will stay, she said. All right, I will marry you. He let his breath out. He had not, she realized, been breathing properly. He had been holding it. But I am going to say my conditions plain, too, she said. Because you said yours plain, and a thing said plain deserves a thing said plain back, say them. The deed carries both our names. Not yours with mine, added. Both names equal, the way two partners' names go on a partnership deed, and I will go into town with you next week, and we will file it that way at the land office in front of Mr. Brooks, who has just learned how to read a filing properly. All right. I am not your housekeeper in my own house. I will cook, because I like cooking, and I will keep a clean kitchen, because I like a clean kitchen. But I am not the housekeeper. I am the partner. When a man comes up the track to talk about cattle, he talks to both of us at the table, not to you on the porch while I bring coffee. When Mr. Hennessy comes back next month with the Territorial Review, he sits with both of us. When you write to your sister in Missouri, which you will, you write her that her brother is married to his partner. All right, and Denny stays. He has a place here for as long as he wants one. He will work for it, and we will not coddle him, but he stays. He came up that track at 5 in the morning, and he told the truth in a room full of his neighbors, and a boy who does that does not get put off a place. All right. And one more. Yes. You ride again. He looked at her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the doorway 9 days ago, the way he had looked at the 1861 filing in the lamp the first night, the way a man looks at a thing he had decided was not for him anymore. Cora, I do not mean tomorrow. I do not mean next week. I mean we will find you a horse, the right size and the right temper. And we will find you a saddle a one-legged man can mount, and you will ride your own south pasture again before next spring. Because a man who sits on a porch for 2 years is not the man I am marrying. The man I am marrying is the man who came in through that door behind me an hour ago with his head up after a hearing, and that man rides. He looked at the porch boards. He looked at his crutch against the rail. Then he looked back at her, and his face did the thing it had done on the porch the night she carried the stakes up. The thing she had named finally, in Eleanor's kitchen, by lamp. It was a man waking up. All right, he said. All of it, Cora. He held out his hand. He did not reach far. He held it out across the small space between his chair and her bench, palm up, the way a man offers a hand to a horse he wants to ask something of. And she looked at it for 1 second, and then she put her hand in it. He closed his fingers around hers. He did not pull her toward him. He did not need to. He held her hand on the arm of his chair in the blue light, and his thumb moved once across the back of her knuckles, and that was all, and that was the first time he had touched her, and it was enough. They sat like that until the dark came. In the morning, she went out to the south pasture before breakfast. She wanted to see it at first light. She walked down through the near fence and through the gate Denny had once left open, and along the line of the channel that had been packed shut. And she stopped at the bend where the clay had been driven in, and she looked at it. Holt came down behind her. He came down slowly, on the crutch. But he came down, and she did not turn around to watch him come, because the watching would have been a small thing, and the morning was not a small thing. He stood beside her. He set the crutch in the grass. Hennessy and 2 men from the Territorial Review had ridden out at dawn, and they were already at work 300 yards downstream. They had broken the upper plug the day before, and they were now clearing the bend. And as Cora and Holt stood there, the last shovel of clay came out of the channel, and the water, which had been pressing against it for 48 hours, came through. It came slowly at first. It came in a thin brown rope along the bottom of the cut. Then it widened. Then it ran clear. Then it ran the way a creek runs when it has remembered where it is going, and the south pasture, which had been dust for a month, took the water along its old furrows, and the dust went dark. and somewhere down at the lower end of the channel, a single thirsty cow lifted its head and walked toward the sound. Cora stood and watched it. Holt stood beside her. He did not put his arm around her because he was leaning on his good leg and his hand was holding the rail of the upper fence, but he stood beside her without the crutch between them, and his shoulder was against her shoulder, and his shoulder was steady. "Cora," he said. "Yes, there you are." That was all he said. He said it the way he had said, "I'm not most men in the lamp" the first night, low and flat and meaning it, and she understood what he was saying. That he had not, until this morning, looked properly at the thing standing next to him, that he had looked at her in the doorway 9 days ago, and looked at her in the kitchen by lamp, and looked at her across the land office table. But that he had not, until water ran again past his boots, looked at her the way a man looks at the person he is going to spend the rest of his life standing beside. "There you are." She did not answer him in words. She lifted her hand from the rail and she laid it against the side of his face, palm flat, fingers along his jaw, and she held it there for one breath, and then she took it down. He closed his eyes for the breath she held it, and opened them when she took it down, and that was the second time she had touched him, and it was enough. They went back up to the house for breakfast. 2 weeks later, on a market day, Cora rode into Bitter Creek alone. She had errands at the feed store and at the dry goods, and she had a letter for the post. Holt had written his sister in Missouri, and Cora had written one of her own behind it, and the 2 letters were going east in the same envelope. She tied the bay at the rail outside the post office, and she went in and posted the letter. And when she came back out into the street, she saw Marsh. He was standing at the corner of the post office building, with a coat over his arm and a small leather case at his feet. He was alone. There was no lawyer beside him, and no horse waiting, and no carriage. The Territorial Review had moved fast on the matter of the receipts and the survey filings, and what could be sold of his holdings had been sold to pay restitution to the Hadleys and the Briggses and the Olsons, and what could not be sold had been seized, and he was leaving Bitter Creek on the noon stage with a coat and a case. And the name was the worst of it, because the name had been his currency in this valley for 10 years, and it was not currency anymore. He saw her, he did not look away. He had the small-held face of a man who had decided to take whatever was coming at him on the street, as the price of having done what he had done. And he stood there with his coat over his arm, and waited. She walked across the street to him. She did not hurry, and she did not slow. She stopped 4 feet from him, which was close enough to speak without raising her voice, and she looked at him properly. She looked at his small, neat face, and his small, neat mustache, and the watch chain that was still across his vest because he had not had the sense or the means to put it away. He did not say anything. He waited. She did not say anything either. She gave him one nod. It was a small nod. It was the nod a person gives another person they have seen. Not a friend, not a man forgiven, not a man embraced. The nod a person gives to acknowledge that another person is standing in the same street at the same moment, that another person exists. It was not forgiveness. She did not have forgiveness in her for him, and she was not going to manufacture it for the comfort of the street. It was the mercy of being seen. It was the thing he had refused for 10 years, to give to anyone in this valley, to look at them, to count them, to admit they were standing there. And she gave it to him once, in front of the post office, on a market day, because she had decided long ago, at 12 years old, and at 20, and at the freight clerk's counter 9 days into a new town, that she would not become the thing that had been done to her. She walked on past him. She did not look back. She heard behind her the small sound of a man taking a breath he had not been sure he was allowed to take, and then she heard nothing else, and the noon stage came up the street and stopped, and when she came back out of the dry goods, half an hour later, the stage was gone and the corner of the post office was empty. And Aldous Marsh had left Bitter Creek and would not come back. She rode home in the late afternoon. The cottonwoods along the south track were going yellow at their tops. The high yellow they go in the first week of October. And the south pasture, when she came up over the rise, was greening at the lower edge where the water had been running for 14 days. The cattle were on it. Denny was on it too, on the gray gelding, riding the fence line in the slow, careful way she had taught him the second week, and he lifted his hat to her as she came up the track, and she lifted hers back. Holt was in the yard. He was not on the porch. He was in the yard by the corral with the bay mare Hennessy had brought him 3 days ago. A quiet, broad-backed mare, 15 hands, the kind of mare a man could mount from a block. And he had the saddle on her, and he was talking to her in the low, even voice he used with horses and with Cora and with no one else. He saw Cora come up the track. He did not call to her. He set his good foot in the stirrup. He took hold of the horn with both hands. He pulled himself up onto the mare's back, slow and ugly and successful, and he settled himself in the saddle, and he gathered the reins, and he sat there in the yard, on a horse, for the first time in 2 years and 3 months. She rode up beside him on the bay. She did not say anything. She did not need to. They rode out together along the south fence in the yellow afternoon. Slow, because his leg needed slow, and the water in the channel beside them ran clear and steady, and made the small, chuckling sound water makes when it has remembered its old bed, and the cattle along the line lifted their heads. And a single jay called once from the cottonwoods, and was answered by another, and the sun went down behind the ridge, where Marsh had once stood, and named Holt Calder a cripple, and from this side of the ridge, that ridge was only a ridge. She had not been invisible. She had walked down off the stage in Bitter Creek 9 weeks ago with a carpet-bag in one hand, and her fare in the other, and a clerk had laughed, and a street had looked past her, and she had walked up a rutted track to a porch where a man had told her to leave, and she had set her bag down on the boards and said she would start with supper. And she had been visible the whole time. The world had simply refused to look. The world had looked at the size of her body, and decided it had seen her, and it had not seen her at all. It had not seen her hands, which knew soil and water and the weight of a feed sack. It had not seen her eye, which read a ledger and a fence line and a man's face by lamp. It had not seen her spine, which had carried her up a porch step in the blue light with 4 pine stakes in her arms, and one night to save a place she had not been hired to save. She had not been invisible. She had been standing there the whole time. And on a yellow afternoon in October of 1883, on a creek-fed cattle ranch in Bitter Creek, with the water running again past her horse's feet, and a man on the horse beside her, who had set her name in the lamp, and asked her plain to be loved, and met every condition she set, without flinching, Cora Whitmore rode the south fence line of the place that carried her name beside his, on the deed at the land office in town. And she had earned every acre of it, and she knew it. And so did he, and so at last did Bitter Creek.